There is a dangerous misunderstanding about empathic people. Most think empathy means weakness. Most think kindness means tolerance without limits. Most think the person who keeps forgiving, keeps understanding, keeps giving second chances will continue doing it forever. But that is not how it works. Empaths are not weak people. In fact, many of the strongest people you will ever meet are empaths. They carry pain silently. They absorb tension without reacting. They listen when nobody listens to them. They understand people who never even try to understand them back. And because they naturally see the wounds inside others, they often become overly patient with behavior that would make other people walk away immediately. They forgive lies because they see insecurity behind the lies. They forgive anger because they recognize pain behind the anger. They forgive distance because they understand fear. They forgive betrayal once because they hope the person will change. They forgive disrespect because they value peace over conflict. But there is a line most people never notice until it is too late. And once that line is crossed, something changes permanently. The frightening thing about an empath is not their anger. It is their silence after they finally stop caring. Because before that moment, they fought for the relationship emotionally even when nobody saw it. They defended people in private. They made excuses for people who hurt them. They stayed loyal long. After respect disappeared, they kept hoping, kept trying, kept believing. But every disappointment leaves a mark. Every broken promise removes another layer of emotional trust. Every manipulation teaches them another painful lesson. Eventually, the empath begins to realize something devastating. They are being emotionally drained by people who only value what they can take. And once that realization becomes clear, the emotional connection begins to die. Most people think the final argument ends. Relationships. That is wrong. Relationships usually end emotionally long before they end physically, especially with empaths. The empath does not suddenly stop loving. They slowly become exhausted. They slowly become emotionally numb. They slowly stop explaining themselves because they realize their words are being ignored. They stop defending their intentions because they are tired of being misunderstood. They stop begging for honesty because they see the truth in people's actions. And the moment an empath emotionally detaches, it becomes almost impossible to bring them back, because empaths do not leave impulsively. They leave after surviving emotional storms longer than they should have. One of the biggest mistakes people make is assuming forgiveness means access. Just because an empath forgives you does not mean they trust you again. Just because they remain calm does not mean the damage disappeared. Empaths understand human imperfection deeply, but repeated disrespect changes how they see someone permanently. They begin noticing patterns instead of excuses. They begin studying behavior instead of words. They begin protecting their peace instead of protecting the relationship. This is where many people become shocked. They are used to the empath tolerating everything. They are used to the empath staying available no matter how badly they are treated. So when the empath suddenly becomes cold, distant, unavailable, and emotionally unreachable, people panic. But what they fail to understand is that the empath already mourned the relationship privately long before leaving. There is a specific line that changes everything for an empath. It is not always betrayal. It is not always cheating. It is not always yelling or conflict. Often, the deepest wound for an empath is realizing their heart was being taken for granted, realizing their loyalty was being exploited, realizing their compassion became a tool others used against them. Nothing destroys an empath faster than feeling emotionally unseen while giving everything they have. Because empaths do not just give attention, they give emotional energy. They invest mentally, spiritually, emotionally. They notice tiny details. They remember conversations. They study moods. They carry people emotionally without even realizing it. And when that level of care is repeatedly ignored or abused, the empath reaches a breaking point. The breaking point does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks terrifyingly calm. The empath simply stops reacting, stops chasing, stops trying to fix everything, stops over-explaining, stops checking on people who never checked on them, stops reopening doors for those who kept slamming them shut, and that silence confuses people. Because many only valued the empath once the emotional support disappeared. Many only realized the empath's importance once the warmth vanished from the room. People underestimate how dangerous emotional exhaustion can become inside a deeply caring person. An empath can survive enormous amounts of emotional pain, but once their nervous system reaches its limit, self-protection activates. Suddenly they become unreachable. Suddenly the person who once tolerated everything now tolerates nothing. Suddenly the person who always responded stops answering. Suddenly the person who always gave chances closes the door without warning. And people call this coldness. But it is not coldness. It is survival. You must understand something important about empaths. Their boundaries are usually built from pain, not ego. Most empaths did not start life guarded. They became guarded after repeated emotional injuries, after being manipulated, after being misunderstood, after giving loyalty to people who only returned convenience, after loving people who only loved the benefits of being loved. Every heartbreak sharpened their awareness. Every betrayal increased their intuition. Every disappointment taught them to observe actions instead of promises. This is why empaths eventually become extremely selective with their energy. They begin realizing energy is life, attention is life, peace is life. And giving those things to the wrong people destroys the soul slowly. Many empaths spend years trying to rescue emotionally unavailable people, trying to heal narcissistic personalities, trying to save relationships built entirely on imbalance. But eventually a painful truth emerges. You cannot heal someone who enjoys hurting others. You cannot fix someone committed to selfishness. You cannot pour endlessly into people determined to stay empty. The empath's greatest transformation happens when they stop seeing self-sacrifice as love. That is the moment everything changes. Because for years they confused suffering with loyalty. They believed enduring pain proved commitment. They believed tolerating disrespect showed emotional maturity. They believed understanding toxic behavior made them compassionate. But true emotional intelligence eventually teaches them something deeper. Love without respect becomes emotional slavery. And once an empath understands this, their standards rise dramatically. They no longer chase connection at the cost of self-respect. They no longer overextend themselves to keep emotionally draining people comfortable. They stop shrinking themselves for acceptance. They stop apologizing for having emotional depth. They stop explaining basic decency to people committed to selfishness. And this new version of the empath shocks everyone around them. Why? Because people become attached to the version of the empath that had no boundaries. They miss the version that tolerated emotional neglect silently. They miss the version that accepted crumbs while giving feasts. But growth changes people. Pain changes people. Awareness changes people. And once an empath truly learns their worth, access to them becomes rare. One of the most painful experiences for an empath is being accused of changing after finally creating boundaries. Suddenly people say the empath became selfish, distant, dramatic, cold, difficult. But boundaries always offend those who benefited from the absence of them. That is why emotionally unhealthy people often resist the empath's growth. The moment the empath stops overgiving, manipulators lose control. The moment the empath stops chasing, users lose access. The moment the empath stops tolerating disrespect, toxic people become exposed. Empaths are often deeply spiritual people emotionally. Even if they never speak about spirituality openly, they feel energy intensely. They notice emotional shifts immediately. They can sense dishonesty beneath smiles. They can feel resentment hidden behind compliments. They can detect emotional danger before logical evidence appears. But many empaths ignore their intuition because they desperately want to believe the best in others. This creates enormous suffering. Their intuition warns them, but their compassion overrides the warning. That internal battle destroys countless empaths emotionally. Their heart says, stay patient. Their intuition says, leave. Their empathy says, understand them. Their nervous system says, protect yourself. And many empaths continue sacrificing themselves until emotional burnout forces them to wake up. Burnout changes an empath permanently. Once they experience the consequences of endless emotional overgiving, they become far more protective of their inner peace. They begin understanding that not every person deserves unlimited access to their heart. They begin understanding that kindness without discernment becomes self-destruction. They begin understanding that love must include reciprocity, honesty, effort, and respect. One of the strongest moments in an empath's life is when they finally stop trying to convince people to value them. That changes everything. Because many empaths waste years trying harder for people who already made up their minds, trying to prove their worth, trying to earn basic decency, trying to gain emotional consistency from emotionally inconsistent people. But real power begins when the empath realizes their value does not decrease because someone failed to appreciate it. And this is where the final line appears. The line that cannot be uncrossed. The moment the empath realizes continuing the relationship requires betraying themselves. That is the breaking point. Not anger, not revenge, not hate. Self-betrayal. Because empaths can survive pain, but eventually they refuse to participate in their own emotional destruction. When that moment arrives, the empath becomes incredibly difficult to manipulate. Guilt stops working. Emotional games stop working. Silent treatment stops working. False promises stop working. Why? Because the empath finally sees patterns clearly. And once patterns become visible, illusion disappears. Many people are shocked by how final an empath's departure can become. They assume the empath will return because the empath always returned before. But what they fail to understand is that every return came with emotional damage. Every reconciliation cost the empath another piece of trust. Every disappointment pushed them closer to emotional detachment. So by the time the empath actually leaves, they are not making an emotional decision. They are making a survival decision. And survival decisions rarely reverse. There is another truth people rarely discuss. Empaths remember emotional pain deeply. Not because they are weak, but because they feel life intensely. Words affect them deeply. Disrespect affects them deeply. Betrayal affects them deeply. Even if they smile externally, emotional wounds can remain inside for years. This is why repeated emotional harm eventually changes their entire personality. The warm person becomes cautious. The open person becomes private. The trusting person becomes observant. But here is what many people misunderstand. The empath does not become cold because they stopped caring. They become guarded because they cared too much for too long without safety. There is a huge difference. Empaths crave emotional safety more than excitement. They crave honesty more than perfection. They crave peace more than intensity. But many attract chaotic personalities because emotionally wounded people are drawn toward nurturing energy. And at first, the empath feels needed, important, valuable. They believe their love can heal the other person. But over time, they realize they are becoming emotionally consumed by dysfunction. That realization becomes life-changing. Because healthy love energizes you. Toxic love drains you. Healthy love creates clarity. Toxic love creates confusion. Healthy love respects boundaries. Toxic love punishes boundaries. Healthy love feels safe. Toxic love feels addictive. Once an empath learns this difference, their entire life changes. They stop romanticizing emotional chaos. They stop confusing inconsistency with passion. They stop calling emotional suffering loyalty. They begin choosing peace over emotional drama. And people who once had unlimited emotional access suddenly lose it forever. This is why some people regret hurting empaths years later. Not because the empath seeks revenge, but because truly genuine people are rare. Deep loyalty is rare. Emotional sincerity is rare.